Morning, V2. How's your week been?
Yeah, morning, B1. Yeah, pretty good, really, on the whole. I think, somewhat of a recovery from a couple of those injuries, starting to feel a little bit better, and got a little bit more mileage into the legs. And then finished with quite a fun event on Friday that a friend arranged, which was a beer dash, 2 times 1,500 meters on a local trail, which was a lot of fun. So that was a nice thing to finish on for the week. How about you? How's your week?
I'll tell you now, but that beer dash did look like good fun, and I believe you took the trophy, okay?
Oh yeah, well, like I have a trophy. I do have it up here, but it was quite a funny trophy. It was a sippy cup, which with Thomas the Tank Engine on it. And yeah, interestingly, I sort of thought, well, the first dash you get two opportunities. I'll go a little bit slower, and then save something for the second dash, because you get two opportunities and they then take your fastest time. But that said, as soon as you get into it, you're sort of on it. And I must admit, didn't even really look at my watch once, because so focused just on making sure I was getting my footing right and keeping the pace up. I think 500 meters in, I was virtually done. It was so hard. I was slightly uphill going the one way, and then fortunately sort of got to the top, and then came back down. I think my heart rate was well through the roof, and it fortunately was a bit of down coming back, and sort of almost surprised myself by the time. And needless to say, the second dash was not quite as quick, but yeah. So no, it was good fun, and yeah, and quite got the adrenaline going for sure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you can hold on to that trophy. And I saw the time on Strava. I think you were well under 4 minutes a K, so that's pretty impressive for that terrain. Well done. Yeah, my
Thanks.
week's also been my constant challenge, I guess, is just trying to fit running in with everything else that's going on. But I really picked things up this week, so I've had a good week. I think I haven't looked at my stats yet, but I think I was somewhere over the 50 Ks for the week. And yeah, starting to feel a bit better coming off that cold that I had, and that sort of back issue. So yeah, no, very positive. And for me, the highlight was probably park run last week, which I'm trying to do weekly now. Or sorry, when I say park run yesterday, with Dylan, it was his birthday, so we did a sort of a birthday park run together, which was good fun.
Yeah, I saw that nice photo of him, and very special when you can still run with your kids. You're lucky you have that with your kids. Mine are less keen, but I suspect over time, if we think about ourselves, we only took up running quite late. So I suspect maybe in my case, the kids might take up running later on in life. But nice that you could do that. And I saw you had a nice long run today. That you pulled that one out the bag, almost a 19 Ks.
Yeah, no, that was I'm feeling a little tired now actually, but it was lovely. And we'll talk a bit more about the sort of discipline of the long runs. But I know you challenged me on the early runs last week, so I was out of bed at 6 o'clock this morning to do my run. So I was pretty happy with
Jeez,
that as well.
impressive. It must have been good weather in Melbourne then.
No, it's actually I was okay, but it's not warm yet in Melbourne, I can tell you that. But it wasn't pouring with rain at least. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's a fantastic day here in Perth, and we were driving back from our run, and the ocean is as flat as a pancake. It's a beautiful day, so it was a bit easier for me to get up, and also started at 6, so it was
Yeah.
nice.
Nice. Okay, well, Kev, why don't we get into our topic for today, which is the sort of follow on from last week on sustainable goals. So just a quick recap. Last week we talked about setting and contextualizing goals. So we talked a little bit about the what. We used the SMART goal setting technique for that. And we talked about how those goals that you should set should be congruent with your values. We then talked about the why. So these are the deeper reasons as to why you're setting goals, and they tend to be those sort of more emotional reasons. And then the last sort of aspect of what we talked about last week was the barriers to achieving your goals. So this week we get down into the doing phase of the goal, sort of sustainable goal setting, and it's around planning and executing on goals. And so everything that we're doing is obviously in the context of making things sustainable. So, and I think particularly that today, as we talk about the planning and executing, there'll be a bit of focus on, how do we make this sustainable, particularly as we sort of start to ramp things up pretty significantly to be able to run the 90-kilometer Comrades. So let's get into it. I'm just going to see if I can share screen here quickly. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that.
Yeah, that's good, my side.
Okay, so yeah, so the first part is the plan. So this is, we'll talk about, how we come up with our plan, and then the second part is the review part as you go along. How do you review your progress on your plan? So let's just do what we did last week, Kevin. Just sort of talk through where each of us are at. This first part, and I know you've had a busy week, so probably haven't had a lot of chance to get into the sort of detail of the plan, if you like, but this is really mapping out, how you're going to achieve what you've set out to achieve. It is very much about breaking it down. So the key to this is, you can have your end goal, which for us is obviously running the Comrades, but you need to have little milestones and goals along the way. And it really needs to translate into action that you can take tomorrow, essentially. So, what are you going to do tomorrow to start sort of working on your plan? So I don't know whether, you've had a lot of thought about that sort of detail. I've started to do a little bit of work on that, which I'm happy to share, but why don't you sort of tell us what you've done so far?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hill. Yeah, I've sort of thought about it more in the context of the marathon that I did in Berlin in 2019, and sort of tried to channel a bit of that in terms of my approach there. And I sort of took a slightly lazier approach, if you like, when I did that, from the perspective of actually getting a coach. And that was certainly helpful. And I'd encourage other people to do the same if you've got the means, because what it does do is it gives you that accountability partner and someone you can check in along the way. But also in terms of the detail, it actually gives you all that detail. So by providing, and I know I filled in a questionnaire when I first got the coach, and they then tailored a program with various blocks of training for me, and ultimately then it's up to you then to execute. So at least the planning was done, and you knew that a professional was doing it. But I suspect I'll be taking a slightly different approach this time round, in that I feel like now that I've got a bit more experience, I can work on a lot of that detail myself. And also we'll talk obviously more about the review part, but I think I've got a bit better at obviously knowing where I'm at and making sure that I adjust the plan as I go. But I know that you've gone into a bit of the detail on your Comrades goal. So I'm really keen to hear from you what you've done.
Yeah, well, you know how I love the odd spreadsheet. So I got out the spreadsheet and I started mapping weeks, etc. My plan is basically falling into two big blocks of training. The first block is focused on Queenstown Marathon, which I've got happening on the 19th of November. And so, marathon plans are often 10 to 12 weeks. So the sort of training that I'm looking at is a sort of a 12-week plan. So I've just completed week 2. So that's sort of, I guess for me, that'll be my focus all the way up until running Queenstown. And then from there, hopefully with a reasonably good base, I'll turn my mind more to Comrades then. And we haven't even had a chance to talk about this really, Kev, but you know, it's you almost work backwards, right? You look at your race dates and then you figure out, you know, how do you fit the plan in so that you're peaking at the right time. So Comrades is still uncertain, as we know, in terms of date, but it's looking more likely now that they're actually going to revert to the June date. And it's looking like the 11th of June is a highly likely date. So when we started this, we were talking about a year out being end of August. That might have come forward a few months.
Yeah.
Yeah, so based on that, I'm sort of taking worst case scenario now, if you like. So based on race date being 11th of June, and just looking at a couple of typical Comrades programs, they're obviously longer than your marathon program. So the one I've looked at is 25 weeks long. And so if I map it into that race date, believe it or not, our first week of training is the week of Christmas. And so that's an interesting one to reflect on, because Christmas is normally a time when you're sort of taking it a little bit easier, enjoying some of the festivities. I think this year maybe will be a little bit less enjoying the festivities and starting to focus a bit on Comrades. But yeah, so just that sort of time-wise, at least, I haven't got into the details of, you know, well, for Queenstown Marathon, I actually have. There's you know, I've sort of got a view on what I'll be doing every week. But obviously for Comrades, it's still a little way away, but we'll have to start mapping out some detail there. So that's I guess the detailed part of the plan as far as I've got on it.
Yeah, well, nice. Well done. I mean, and very excited about that date being brought forward, even though it gives us less time. I think that is a better date from our perspective, in that we sort of can then get some good training in through the summer. And, you know, whilst it'll be the heart of winter in South Africa, I think, you know, it's typically going to be cooler, which is a good thing. And so, yeah, I'm excited about that potential date, and I know they've got to firm it up by, I think, early October, they're talking about. So that would be good. Interesting about Christmas. I was just thinking when you said that, oh gosh, it's going to be really hot in Perth. That's going to be dreadful for training, and probably likewise in Melbourne. Then I realized we'll actually be in Italy skiing. So I was going to ask you, do you think skiing contributes to your training?
I don't know, skiing's got all sorts of things attached to it. I mean, it probably does help. I mean, and I'm not a skier, but I think it's, you know, it'll certainly help on the strength side of things, Kev. I think the biggest thing I'd be focused on is not doing myself an injury, but I know you're a little bit more experienced than I am.
Yeah, no, interestingly though, one of the things in skiing, and I'm not a good skier, but is your quad strength, and there's something that's quite interesting from a Comrades perspective, as we know, and we've heard from people talking about this year's down run, just how brutal it is on your legs, and particularly your quads. So building your quad strength is critical, and that little exercise where you lean up against a wall at sort of a 90-degree angle and do lots of those repeats, that's a neat little exercise for skiing.
Yeah, well, spot on there. You've got two reasons, skiing and Comrades, to start to get into your strengths program, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, why don't we move on to barriers? We talked last week a little bit around the barriers that we had identified, and obviously part of the planning phase is planning around those barriers. So I don't know whether you've mentioned one or two at a high level. Is there any particular one that you're very focused on for Comrades?
Yeah, look, the biggest one for me is definitely going to be trying to overcome the Achilles injury. And we spoke about strength and injury prevention, and I spoke about my chassis not being up to speed. So that's definitely the biggest focus. The physio has given me a challenge of doing these calf raises, which effectively, you know, build your calf strength and then take the pressure off the Achilles. And the challenge is that I'll get up to carrying 80 kilograms, which is my body weight, within 6 months when doing those one-legged calf raises. I can barely do it with no weight at the moment, which is quite scary in a way. But that's a great goal to have. And I think over and above that, there'll need to be some other exercises thrown in. I do know you've got a little bit further with your plan on that. So why don't you share what you're looking at from overcoming a barrier perspective?
Yeah, no, I've sort of flagged a couple of barriers last week. I'll just talk about two of them that I think are potentially my biggest barriers. So the one was obviously the strength side of it, particularly around, being able to obviously get through 90 Ks, but also very up and down course, so running hills, both uphill and downhill. So yeah, so what I've done this week, I've identified a strength plan that's really going to be my base plan that I'll start to work on now for Queenstown, but will really become key for Comrades. And it is specific to Comrades. And so I haven't kicked it off in a big way, but I'll be looking to do that this week. But, one of the things with strength exercises, I guess, is making sure you get the technique of whatever you're doing right. And so this week I've really just focused on, locking down the plan, making sure that I understand the technique of all of the exercises. And then, as I said, I think, my initial target is going to be to do the routine twice a week. So it's about a 45-minute program. So I'll try and do that twice a week, and then I'll probably ramp that up to 3 times a week, probably post Queenstown. Yeah, and we've spoken about this a lot. We don't enjoy it. We'd far rather be out running. So it is going to be challenging for me. I've made a little deal with myself. Monday is normally a bit of a rest day for me for running. So Monday will be the one day I'm going to try and do sort of my first lot of strength training. And then the deal is, if I don't get that done on Monday, that doesn't allow me to go out and run until I get that done. So obviously I want to be out there running. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm sure you'll help hold me accountable on it.
Yeah, nice. So that's a good plan, I think, and thanks for sharing it as well. I'll definitely see whether that's going to suit some of the issues I've got. And yeah, one of those things is often when you start the strength program, obviously it's hard at first, and just sticking to it and making a habit is critical. And one of the things I've found, particularly in doing things like calf raises, is sometimes when you're struggling and your body's struggling, and then you do those exercises, it almost initially makes things a little bit worse and makes it harder to run, and you just sort of go, well, therefore I'm not going to do it because it's making everything a lot sore. But sticking to the program, and also probably, as you're doing, is picking days that you're actually not running potentially, because sometimes it can be a little bit much to do both, and also finding the time. So I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, you're not going to do a strength program on the day that you're doing a big sort of quality session or long run. So it's really just, sort of putting it in where it's going to work for you in terms of your running program as well. So yeah, this is probably going to be almost the hardest thing for me, I think. But as we've said plenty of times, without it, we're not probably going to get through this. So the other barrier for me, which is as big a challenge, I think, is just the time challenge. Right now things are probably not too bad because I haven't had to ramp up significantly. Sorry, I've just got a flashing light here that I wouldn't have to deal with. Yeah, sorry. I was saying, Kev, it's a time challenge. So, what I've started to do is just map out not only my sort of running program, but also my program for the rest of the year, in terms of, I've got a little bit of travel coming up. I've got some, pressures at work. And so just, getting clear in my mind, how I am going to have to compromise every now and then, so that it doesn't stress me out as I go along. And then, the big one will obviously be next year when we get into the heavy Comrades training. and we were joking about the 6 a.m. runs, but I mean it's very clear to me that I'm going to have to fit in a lot of those early morning runs, particularly on the weekends. So yeah, that's sort of something that I've spent a bit of time on, and yeah, we'll see how we go on that one as well.
Yeah, I think another thing I'd throw is just talking about those long runs is one of the sort of learnings I had for Berlin, was really dreading some of those long runs, and also again finding someone that you could actually, who's maybe a very solid runner, who can pull out sort of 30 Ks at will, and I fortunately bumped into someone at the time and said, I was really dreading this 30K run that I had to do, and they said, oh, happy to come along and run with you, and it made such a difference. And even just chatting along the way, and it made it a fair bit easier. Plus, the benefit of those longer runs is really getting on top of your nutrition and hydration. So I think using those long runs to test those things out, as well as small things around what you're wearing, whether that's comfortable for race day, and as I say, hydration critical as well.
Yeah, no, spot on. Yeah, and that's one of the things I've got down to work on as well, is just figuring out how I'd probably do more group runs or runs with more people, particularly those long runs, as you said. Typically, because of my sort of schedule, I just run when I can, and that doesn't always work in terms of scheduled group runs, etc. But it's clear to me when doing a 4-hour run or something like that, it's a lot better running with someone than running on your own. So yeah, I'll definitely be focused on that as I get into
I mean, if you really struggle, I can send you a cutout of me, and we'll just like attach it to you, and you can run next to me.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, no, I as I said, I think I need to get something real happening there. So there are plenty of running groups, etc. And I think for those long ones, I'll get focused on that. Anyway, the next one on here, Kev, is logistics. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that. I think the biggest thing for us right now is the date of Comrades, and then the logistics will fall around that. I think we'll know that date in the next few weeks, and then we can really start to plan out for that.
Yeah, I have, and we probably discussed a little bit just around whether one sort of runs through one of these package type deals that they do a lot of that planning for you. And I know I have a friend who's big on that. He goes around to various countries running these marathons, and because he's not necessarily familiar with that country or the race itself, he sort of outsources that to a company and joins up with that. And I think that's a good option as well to consider. I know that Comrades particularly is logistically very difficult in the lead up, and particularly because of the early start in Pietermaritzburg. So making sure that you've got all that sort of stuff dealt with, and your transfers from the hotel or wherever you're staying to get there on time. There's a lot of that planning that obviously needs to happen. So probably as far as I've got is really just thinking about one of those packages, whether that might be an option or not. I guess fortunately we do know South Africa a little bit, so we know our way around. So I think we've got a few different options to consider.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the one thing that I'm pretty clear on, having done a few of those really big marathons with early starts where you need to turn up at the start line hours and hours before. I mean, those can really affect your race, if you like. And I actually noticed for Comrades this year, a lot of people travel up from Durban, which is the finish point, to Pietermaritzburg, the morning of the race. They've got lots of roadworks happening there at the moment, and they were suggesting to people that to get to the start line on time, you leave Durban at 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think 2:30, or maybe it was 3:30, but irrespective, right? Doing that would just be crazy. So I think we'll definitely be staying close to that start line.
Yeah, I agree. And that's again where those companies do tend to get quite good deals with hotels nearby, and it locks you in and you're not fluffing around with trying to, find the best accommodation. So I think some of those things can be really important. They do tend to find accommodation right near the start line. I know you had that to some extent in New York. I had the same in Berlin where, I had that, and wandering down to the start line or having a short jog to the start line. I don't think there'll be any jogging prior to Comrades, but being close to the start line is pretty critical.
Yeah.
So that's something I think we put some thought into and try and get that locked in as soon as we know the date.
Yeah, no, spot on. And then this last one on plan is just around help, and it's really, you mentioned coaching before, so coaching is the obvious one, but there's probably a range of sort of external helpers that you need on a journey like this, particularly around physios, masseuses, etc. So, but I think the big one for us is just figuring out, both you and I have used coaches in the past, and my sense on this one is because it is such a unique and specific race that we'll definitely be looking for coaching from experts on the Comrades. And so we have, we have obviously our current coach from Fordyce Fusion who, is certainly, they have expertise in that. So we haven't mapped this one out in detail yet, Kev, but I think it's going to be important for us.
Yeah, I think it is such a different beast, and even for people who have done ultras, I believe this one is it's got its own peculiarities, and particularly with the down run, you hear so much about how much it sort of takes. And so I think really understanding the course and understanding the nature of the training is pretty critical. So someone who understands the race as opposed to just perhaps an average coach who might not understand those sorts of nuances about the race. I think that's pretty important. So yeah, certainly there seems to be quite a bit available, on coaching. They do have also an official coach of the Comrades Marathon. So there's certainly materials you can get your hands on. But yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be essential.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a bit of about the plan. Why don't we move on to review, because this is actually almost the most critical step, certainly in terms of the sustainability when we talk about goals. And so, it's really, you set out your plan and hopefully everything does go pretty close according to plan, but it never, in my experience, it never quite works out that way. So this is really making sure, you're having checkpoints along the way. And it's being really honest with yourself. There may be good reasons you're not on track, or there may be, it may just be that you're not as motivated as you need to be, etc. So, if you've set sort of milestones along the way, that's one way you can sort of review how you're going. But Kev, why don't you sort of give us a few thoughts that you've had around this review side of things?
Yeah, I think my biggest learning from the Berlin endeavor was, probably just you get quite locked into a program and you get very focused on trying to get your mileage each week. And I think that fixation on mileage can be an issue. I do like time-based programs. There's a lot of research around that. And I think what I'm seeing more and more of is that tends to be the approach rather than getting too fixated on the kilometers. It does mean potentially as well, if you're running well, you can actually get your kilometers up that way a little bit more easily. But I think for me, the biggest learning was getting fixated on the mileage, as I say, and some of the individual sessions. And I know at the time, there were quality sessions and some of the speed work that were really hurting me. And I was carrying the same injury at the time. And, I eventually just had to say to the coach, look, I'm going to have to adjust something here because it's really not working for me. And I knew I'd be compromising on that sort of faster running and quality session. But it did mean that I would then still be able to do my long runs. So we actually dropped some of those quality sessions, which, was disappointing in a way, but it did mean I could actually get sort of the time on my feet, which was so critical from an endurance perspective. So just think listening to your body is a key one. And one of the tips there that I'd also say is if your body is starting to struggle and you know, in ordinary course of events anyway, some cross training is very, very useful. I know that cycling particularly, they talk about as being useful, and I do enjoy a bit of cycling, so I'm definitely going to throw that into my repertoire, and I think it's good for the legs as well. So finding some hills and doing a bit of cycling, I think is something to consider. The other thing from a review perspective, and I think this is where you're pretty good with your spreadsheets, is making sure you're logging a lot of detail. And I used a package called Training Peaks in the past. It's very detailed, and the coach actually had you know, advanced version of that. So every time we caught up, we would actually look at how I was feeling, and it would give you a score around your fitness. It would give you a score around your freshness, and some of those aspects, and you could then adjust and review accordingly. So, you know, that tracking of stats is critical.
Yeah, no.
What have you tended to do, Hill, on this front?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So everything you sort of say in terms of, you know, tracking how you're feeling body-wise, etc., makes so much sense. And I think, you know, and then adjusting where you're not feeling, you know, 100% or you're feeling fatigued or whatever. But yeah, just on the tracking of stats, as you know, I love stats. I've already drawn up a spreadsheet. I don't know if you've had a look at it, Kev, but I find it quite motivating to look back and see how you're going and see how you're improving. And then, you know, what we'll do for Comrades is I've sort of designed a spreadsheet that I've got you and I together, and it's not about being competitive, but I think we'll both find it motivating to look at our progress sort of, you know, and there'll be times when, you know, you coming off injuries right now, I'm very focused on Queenstown Marathon. So there will be times when we're out of sync, but obviously the hope is as we come into Comrades that we get into sync. And yeah, I just I do find it quite motivating to see my progress. And I also I think, you know, I've done this in the past for other races that I've done, and you know, you do focus on the hard stats around, you know, your Ks, you know, various sort of measures that you can look at. There are a bunch of them on Strava, I know, but the other one that I've already started to focus on is just softer things you mentioned there, you know, how you're feeling mentally, et cetera, because there will be weeks where you just don't feel that great or you don't feel motivated. So just recognizing that, and you generally sort of, you know, you'll come out of that, but just actually, you know, acknowledging and recognizing those softer things as well, I've found really helpful to sort of reflect on.
Yeah, I know, Hill, you've used a journal in the past, and I think that's also a good way of tracking some of those softer things around how did your run go on that particular day, you know, and how you're sort of feeling sort of mentally, and how have you found that working for you in the past?
Yeah, no, I found all of those little tools, and there's sometimes a little bit of discipline around, you know, keeping a running journal or whatever it might be. But, you know, I find the way that I do it, even if I don't do it daily, I generally sit down at the end of the week and review my stats, review my notes in my journal, or maybe make a few additional notes. And it's fascinating, even, you know, it's really part of this review, because when you look at it, particularly if you've got a long training plan and you look back on it, it can be very helpful. So, yeah, no, I definitely recommend that, Kev.
Yeah, no, I think what we'll have to share with everyone is the spreadsheet you put together at some point, just to show how we tracking relative to each other. Because one of the fascinating things I think in our instance is that we are so similar across our stats, that, and obviously having such, you know, same genetics or similar genetics, you know, does make it quite fascinating, because when you are comparing athletes, often it's very, very different. But, you know, what's been interesting with you and I is heart rates, VO2 max, some of the Strava scores, etc., have been so similar. And, you know, also our times in particular events have been so similar. Just thinking about that spreadsheet, Hill, that you've created, I think what's going to be interesting is looking at it as B1, B2 side by side in two columns, and comparing those stats. But more so as we get closer to Comrades, because it will give us a sense of whether we are getting more in sync. And, you know, if we can get particularly in sync with our training and our vital stats, I think that's going to give us a better indication of how we'll go on the day.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Kevin. I think, you know, we obviously want to run it together. So the closer we are together, the closer we are in terms of our fitness levels, etc., I think the easier that's going to be. But anyway, why don't I sort of just wrap it up in terms of this sort of phase of the sustainable goals? So I think, as I said, the context to all of this is making things sustainable, and there are really three elements that do that, I think. The first one is in the goal setting stage, and it's making sure that whatever goal you set is congruent with your values, because if it's not, then it's probably going to be difficult to keep it going. Then the second one is actually your why, and that's you know, going back to those deeper, largely emotional reasons as to why you're doing something. That's what's going to sort of get you through the tough times, for sure. And then the third one is the review stage. As we talked about, it's around, you know, being honest with yourself, adjusting your plan when you need to, not just pushing through injuries, etc. And it can even extend to reviewing your goal. We haven't really talked about that, but you know, there are times when you actually have to reset your goal. In our context, it could be resetting our target time. We obviously wouldn't want to be resetting the goal of doing Comrades, but you know, sometimes those things are even reality. So those are sort of the aspects. I mean, ultimately, I know for both you and I, this is about running longevity. We really want to do this race, but we also want to be running for the next 10 years or whatever it might be. So anyway, that's been good to just talk that through, Kev. I'm sure we'll do a lot more planning as we go through this process.
Yeah, thanks, Hill. And you've certainly made some good progress on thinking it through and starting to put your execution plan in place. So got a bit of catching up to do, but it's great that we can actually share some of these tools together. And hopefully everyone's found it useful in terms of their own planning for their own events. And sometimes taking this sort of planned approach can really help us achieve our goals. So I'll maybe just end as usual with a little quote, and this one is anonymous, so we're not sure who came up with this one, but nice and simple. To be prepared is half the victory, is the quote and thought of the day. So go out, put your plans in place, and make sure they're robust, and hopefully this framework helps everyone in that regard. So from me here in Perth, B2 signing out on my side.
Excellent. Thanks, Kev, and have a good week, and we'll see everyone again next week.
Fantastic. See you, Hill. Cheers.
Bye.